Hi guys, Brian from Boas here. There are certain controversial topics about boas that often cause people to get triggered when they're brought up in Facebook or any other social media setting. By triggered, I mean that people have a pretty extreme emotional response. They often react negatively, and it creates generally a negative experience for the person that started the discussion, and a lot of other people as well. Today I'm going to talk about some of these controversial topics that trigger people, and I'm also going to give you my opinion about these topics, so be sure to stay tuned. If you're new to boa keeping, you've probably already noticed that some of the discussions on social media can get pretty charged about boas. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that people are responding anonymously and there's no repercussions for their responses. So they can pretty much do and say whatever they want. Of course, a lot of these people are just trolls looking to get a reaction. But there are plenty of things that people are reacting to, and I'm just going to touch on some of them today. So the first topic is cohabitation, and that's where you keep more than one boa in the same enclosure. And so a lot of people feel strongly that cohabitation is always a terrible idea and it should never be done. And they react that way if you ask about keeping multiple boas in the same enclosure. So personally, I think in general, cohabitation is a bad idea most of the time. Usually it's better to keep a boa in a separate enclosure. The boa can have its own space. You're not going to have any aggression between the two animals. And also you can monitor the boa a lot easier, if it's in its own enclosure. Of course, when we breed boas, we have to put them more than one boa in the same enclosure. So I do cohabitate my breeding animals. Obviously you need to be together to have the babies. And I've never had any negative things happen from the cohabitation during breeding. And I've kept together dozens and dozens of pairs or trios, typically for 4 to 6 months out of the year. So this is a pretty large amount of experience with keeping boas in this matter. And again, I've had no issues. Some breeders even have breeding strategies where they cohabitate pairs or trios or small groups of boas year-round. And then the boas will mate and have babies when they're ready. This has some advantages over the more traditional breeding where males and females are kept apart for much of the year. The other situation where cohabitation is probably not as big of a deal is in a very large, elaborate enclosure with lots of room for the animals to move and hiding places such as a large naturalistic vivarium. And many zoos and public collections of reptiles will keep multiple animals together in this way. So cohabitation for most pet owners is probably not a great idea, but in certain situations it's not quite as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. The second controversial topic is hybrid snakes. Okay, so where you're taking snakes of different types and crossing them together. And this can either be different species of snakes, like we see these hybrids of corn snakes and king snakes, or even boas and anacondas I've heard of, or different types of pythons, ball pythons and Burmese pythons, etc. Or more specific to boas is where you're crossing different subspecies of boa. For example, taking a true red-tailed boa, crossing it with a common boa, or even crossing, some people would count crossing different localities together, like a Suriname and a Peruvian, as being a hybrid. And this is viewed very controversially by many people. So the obvious reasons why this isn't a good idea most of the time is with boas we want to maintain the purity of the localities, and once you cross together two different localities, even if it's the same subspecies, you can never go back to a pure population. And it's important to maintain these animals in the pure states. Locality boa collectors do not have any want or desire for a mixed breed boa in their collection. And worse off, these mixed breed boas are often sold as the real thing. So someone might not know the difference. And one example of this are the hypo-hog island boas, which are a cross between a hog island boa and a hypo-common boa. They're really 50% hog island boa, but often they look pretty similar, and some people might not be able to tell the difference. So that's a concern of the hybridization. Personally, I don't have any interest in hybridization. I don't think it's a great thing. I would never want to do that. I don't know if I'm 100% against it, as long as an animal is very clearly identified as a hybrid. For example, these cross-species hybrids. But I don't understand the very expensive prices that people are paying for these, or the novelty of them. I just think that they don't look as good as either of the pure parents that created the hybrid. The next controversial topic is asked constantly on the online forums. I get asked this question constantly, and typically someone will acquire a boa, usually it's someone who hasn't had a boa before, and they have this question about what type of boa they have. And so typically the boa will be some type of a common boa, not a pure locality boa. Typically these animals don't have any locality information. They don't have any precise pedigree or anything like that. Often they're rescue animals. And these animals make great pets. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is probably the best type of boa you want to get as a pet for a first-time boa keeper. But usually there's no precise information about what the boa is. It's just a common boa, often mixed breed boa, basically a mutt boa. So the person will post a picture, they'll be convinced that their boa is, a Corn Island boa or a Roatan boa or some kind of very exclusive boa. And then when they ask online what type of boa it is, they get all these negative responses. Another version of this is that they're convinced that their boa has some kind of gene, like it's a new morph and it's got some kind of difference in it, and they're gonna start a new morph project and make millions of dollars, and they have this kind of delusion around that. So that's usually viewed pretty negatively when someone asks these types of questions, and the discussions can get pretty heated and nasty, and they're often shut down on Facebook by the moderators. So again, in general, if you're new to boas and you just got a rescue boa, or you picked up a boa at a pet store, even if it's identified as a red-tailed boa, typically it's just a boa imperator, common boa of no precise locality and often of mixed origin. And again, this is fine. These are great pet boas, but just be happy with what it is. You don't need your boa to be some kind of exclusive morph boa or locality boa for it to make a great pet. Thought I'd grab another boa, and this is a really nice holdback Hog Island boa. This female is from 2018, so she's now going on 5 years old, developing really nicely. So the next controversial topic that people ask about is taking their snake or boa in public. And so sometimes people have this idea that they need to spread the word of boas, and almost as a quasi-religious fervor, they take their snake out, they want to show people the boa, how much they love it, change people's opinions about snakes, that they're really gentle and friendly and they make great pets. And while these people are well-intentioned, they kind of neglect that certain people are just scared of snakes and might have a negative reaction to your pet boa if you take it out in public. Sometimes people will take it on public transportation. They might take it to a public park. Basically, they're taking an animal unannounced into a situation where the public would not expect such an animal. Other times they're taking it to somewhere where it might not be as unexpected. They might take their pet to a pet store where pets are allowed. They might take it to a reptile store. They might take it to a reptile club or Natural History Society or something like that. But they're basically just taking their animal out unannounced without regard to the people that are around them. So in general, I think it's a pretty bad idea to take your animal out in public for a number of reasons. It gives a really bad impression for the rest of the people keeping snakes, that people are doing this because they want to attract attention to themselves or get a reaction from the public. There are a number of really, really toxic videos on Facebook and YouTube where people have done this to get attention. And it just gives a really bad impression to the general public of the responsible reptile keepers. In some instances, this behavior isn't as negative. If you go to a reptile club and you take out your reptile, it's going to be expected that you take reptiles there. So that's not that big of a deal. Generally, taking them to pet stores that allow pets out, also not as big of a deal. But in general, I don't take my snakes out in public ever. And it's also for their own safety. I don't want to put them in a dangerous situation. Taking them out in public, they might be exposed to cold weather or negative environmental conditions. Someone might freak out and cause them injury. So the last thing I want to do is risk my animal's well-being. So I would never take a boa out in public. The next topic that gets people triggered on the social media pages is beginners who have already acquired a boa and are asking very basic questions about its care or even about the type of boa they have, etc. And so the idea is that people should do their homework and they should do their research before getting the boa. And so they shouldn't be asking very basic questions like, basic housing questions, basic questions about the necessary environment, temperature, humidity, etc. They should already know this before they go onto these groups. So first of all, I definitely agree that beginners should do their homework. You should really have a very good idea about the boa's care before you acquire the boa. But in the real world, sometimes people get boas, maybe they get them handed to them in some kind of an unplanned situation. Somebody that took in a boa has no responsibility or ability to care for it. So people step in to try to care for the boa and they haven't done their homework because it's kind of a non-planned type of event that they get the boa. So in general, I don't think it's productive for people to go off on these types of people. We shouldn't belittle somebody for asking a question that seems like something that they should know already before they got the boa. Most of these people are the future of boa keeping. So these are often younger people that don't have the same amount of experience. And if the hobby is going to continue, we need for people to want to continue at keeping boas. So we should be welcoming and nice to these people rather than attacking them. That being said, again, people should do their homework before they get the boa. And if you do ask a very basic husbandry question on these online groups, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get attacked, especially if it's something you could easily find out just by doing a quick Google search. So a related controversial topic is when people attack each other's husbandry choices. And often it's not something that there's really a right or wrong answer about, but they feel really strongly about one way or another. Their way is the right way, and they defend it with a quasi-religious fervor. One example is substrate choice. People have their certain substrates that they feel is the substrate that everybody should use, and all the other substrates are bad and wrong, and you're a bad person if you use the other substrates. So I'm not sure why something that the animal lies on and takes a dump into should create such a negative reaction, but it just does. Personally, I've tried all the different substrates. I think they all kind of suck, in different ways. There's no perfect substrate. I'm kind of constantly moving from one substrate to another. Right now I'm using mostly the cocoa husk bedding, as well as newspaper, corrugated cardboard, and paper towels, depending on the situation. And none of them are perfect, but we just deal with them as best we can. But I'm not sure why someone would get so emotionally attached to their substrate that they have to defend it so vehemently. A couple other topics of husbandry that are controversial and get a lot of reaction are use of full spectrum bulbs for boas, as well as use of vitamin supplements for boas. And although I don't use either of those, if you want to try that, that's fine. I don't think that it's necessarily a wrong thing. I don't know how much benefit you're necessarily going to get. But, a lot of working with boas and breeding them and keeping them is just experimental. We have to try different things. So I'm always interested in hearing your experience, trying different ways of husbandry, what works for you and what doesn't work. Before getting to the next controversial topic, I just wanted to say that part of the reason I set up this channel was so that people would have a space where they can ask questions without the fear of being attacked or being belittled. And there's no dumb questions about boas here. You can ask whatever you want. You can put it in the comments. You can send me a message. I'll do my best to respond. If not directly to you, at least in an upcoming video where I answer viewer questions. So you can count on this channel being a place where you're not going to be attacked or belittled. And if someone does attack or belittle you in the comments, I'll simply delete those comments. Here's another holdback boa. This guy is a 2021 born long-tailed longicauda boa, now about 1.5 years old, from the Bisset bloodline, and he's really starting to show these really nice dark colors. These guys they get a little bit darker with each shed until as adults they have this gorgeous, really dark appearance. So the next topic that is somewhat controversial is feeding, and specifically the feeding intervals. How often should you feed your boa? And there's a lot of discussion on the Facebook forums. It turns negative when talking about feeding. And so on the one extreme we have power feeding, where people are feeding boas as much as they'll eat, deliberately to try to get them to a larger size quicker and hopefully breed them. On the other hand, we have the slow growing approach, where people insist that boas shouldn't be fed more than about once every month or so. And if you feed it too much, it's going to grow too fast, it's going to damage the organs, etc. And so feeding just comes down to common sense, and I've discussed this umpteen times in my videos. You want to feed enough for slow, steady growth. The boas should be putting on anywhere from about 8 inches to about 2 feet of growth per year for their first few years. You don't want the boas to be obese, but you don't want them to be skinny either. They should be nice and muscular, similar to the physique of the boas that I show in my videos, which are, I believe, are getting an optimal food interval. And so people that feed their boas too much, it does damage to their internal organs, and especially their heart. And typically these animals don't have a very long lifespan. They might live to be 9 or 10 years old. Also, typically this doesn't enhance your breeding success. Although you might be able to breed your boa a little bit younger, it's going to have, in general, smaller litters, more likely to slug out, and it's not going to be nearly as good a breeder over its entire lifetime. But power feeding is obviously not a good idea, but there's a reaction by some people that they want to go the other extreme and do this very slow growing approach. I've seen people with stunted animals. The animal is like 4 years old and it's maybe 2.5 feet long or something like that. They're literally feeding it only as much as necessary for it not to die of starvation. And this is a terrible thing for the boas to have to go through. Can you imagine being nearly starved to death year after year? And a boa that's underweight like that is also not going to be able to breed. So again, this isn't rocket science. It's common sense. Feed boas so they grow slowly but steadily. Review one of my many videos on this topic, which I'll link here if you want more discussion. Another controversial feeding topic is live feeding, where people give a live rodent or other animal to their boa. And so the vast majority of boas will take frozen thawed prey items. You don't need to feed them live prey items. It's a common misconception by people that don't know much about boas. In general, it's always better to feed a frozen thawed item rather than a live prey item. The rodent could easily turn on the snake. It can bite the snake, causing injury. At the least, it might cause some type of a scar or cosmetic damage to your snake. At worst, the rodent can actually turn on the snake and eat the snake. I've seen snakes that just have been chewed apart in pictures online. I've never had this happen to me personally. But it's happened where a rat has basically gone off on a ball python. I've seen some terrible looking pictures of these poor animals that have just been chewed to pieces by the rat, and most of their skin is missing, so there's pretty much zero chance that these animals are going to recover. So in general, you don't want to feed live rodents to snakes. Another concern is which is more humane to the rodent, being killed by a snake or being killed by a human. It's kind of controversial. Some people would say that it doesn't really make that much of a difference, but in general, I think it's more humane to use the frozen thawed than the live prey items. I do feed live prey items to baby animals though, because many of my boas will not eat. They won't start eating unless they have a live prey item. And this is especially true for some of the island boas, like the Crawl Key boas and Cocker Key boas, Hog Island boas, etc. Typically, these animals insist on eating live prey items for the first 6 months, often even up to a year of age. and they'll basically starve to death if you don't give them the live prey item. So in this case, there's really no choice. Other boas, like most of my true red tails, will take the frozen thawed prey items from a very young age. Some will even start on frozen thawed. I don't even have to feed them any live prey items, which is always great. But you know, there are reasons why you would need to feed live, but in general it's always a lot better to feed frozen thawed. Sorry about the dog barking. The FedEx truck is actually delivering some rodents, and my dogs just go crazy when they see the FedEx truck. So this brings us to the last item on my list of controversial topics. I'm just going to try to quiet them. This brings us to the last topic that gets people triggered on the Facebook discussion groups, and that is venomous snakes as pets. Should you keep a venomous snake? And so there are people that keep these and feel that this is a, acceptable thing to keep as a pet. There are others that think it's really irresponsible and puts a lot of people in danger, and that this should not be something that people do. So personally, I'm not going to say I'm completely against keeping venomous snakes as pets, although I would never keep a venomous snake, and I think that for the vast majority of people it's a terrible idea. I'm not going to say that I'm completely against it. There are certain people who can do it responsibly, and this should be something that they are allowed to do. However, we're talking about a very, very small group of people here. The vast majority of people that are keeping these animals really have no business keeping them. Not only are they putting themselves and their family at risk, they're putting the public at risk, and they're also causing damage to the responsible reptile keepers. Anytime that a poisonous snake bites somebody or escapes, the media jump all over this, and they have a field day, with their sensationalism about how dangerous snakes are and about what a menace it is to society that people keep venomous snakes, and any reptile for that matter. The animal rights nut jobs like PETA jump all over it, and it's just very bad publicity for reptile keeping in general. So I think that outside of professional labs that milk snake venom, and zoos that have responsible people, there's practically no one that should be keeping venomous snakes. Just very, very small minority of people. I understand that the attraction. Venomous snakes are very beautiful animals. They're very fascinating. Some of them are just gorgeous to look at. But we already have many, many species of non-venomous snake that are equally as appealing. So there's no need to have a venomous snake to have a really cool reptile pet that you can enjoy and admire. And it's just, as I mentioned, I think it's just really not a great idea for most people. In many states it's illegal, like California. I'm sure that doesn't stop a lot of people, but at least the law is there. But in general, I think it's bad for reptile keeping in general, for people to be keeping venomous snakes, unless they're completely prepared for it, which is like almost nobody. So anyway, those are my thoughts on some of these more controversial topics that keep people triggered online. I'd love to hear what you think, if you agree or disagree with any of my opinions. Also, if there's other topics that you've come across that cause people to get emotionally triggered, I'd love to hear it in the comments, so please write them below. As always, shoot me any questions or comments you might have. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your boas.